Mr. Robert,
Hi, let's see, got that? Good.
how are you?
Um, I'm good,
Good. You look good.
very good. We've
Very
been
good.
doing a lot of gardening.
Ah, nice.
See, we
Yes.
got these strawberries right here.
Aha. Oh, wonderful. Oh, man.
I
Yeah.
hate to eat in front
Better.
of you, but you can consider it kind of a shared.
Well, strawberries are like tomatoes, when you get them from the grocery store, they don't have a lot of flavor, but from the garden, they're absolutely different. So, yeah.
Mm, boy, oh man, it's a little tart, but man, has flavor.
Good
Very
morning, Carl.
Hi, Carl.
Good morning, guys.
Robert's eating strawberries from the garden.
Oh, jealous, jealous.
So here, I'll eat this one for you.
Jealous, jealous, jealous. The strawberries are interesting is that they seem to and maybe it's store-bought strawberries, but they seem to go from edible to fuzz covered faster than anything else.
Yeah.
Oh, these go pretty quickly, but there's absolutely no preservative
Yeah.
or poison from you know, for whatever. It's from our garden.
Well,
Yeah.
if you have them in the garden, then you could pick them or you can
Right,
delay picking them and they'll stay fresher than,
Yeah.
right. Fresher than, yeah.
nature works that way.
Mm.
She does. She does. It's a fast turnaround if you let her. I was just on a call this morning with the American Values Network,
Mm.
which I've been going in and out of for probably a year or more now. Um, and I haven't had a chance to really explain my work to them. And so I'm always caught with wanting to correct or manage what they say, which is not cool. So I mostly keep my mouth shut. Um, but we'll see. We'll see. So David Green is also at GRC. So I told him that I'll be doing a two-part GRC thing with both my models so people can see how they work together. And so he's going to be interested in that. So
He is also with the Values Network.
yeah, he's actually the lead in the American
Oh,
Values Network. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about this grouping. I mean, I helped, lead and found a values caucus at the United Nations from the mid 90s through about 2001. And just wondering what kind of, where does their interest spread? What kind of thing?
Well, I would think they'd be connected actually because they're a subset of We All, which is a group that works at the UN level
Mhm.
in a lot of capacities. So I think this is part of that. Um, it's just very interesting. It's been hard for me to really connect with them. They've been together and it's small. There's maybe a dozen people, with six showing up pretty regularly, I think. These are my guesstimates. So, um, but they are trying to be more prominent and create more of a discussion around values. So they're starting to do events. So they have one on May 30th at 9 a.m. Neil somebody on, I think it's on community. They have six values they've chosen for this year: honesty, fortitude, compassion, hope, trust. Anyway, that gets my dander up for a lot of reasons. One, I see values as systems, and they've got a couple of systems messing around in there, which they don't understand. So that makes me nervous. I mean, it's a deep conversation. It's not one I can just go in and tap people on the shoulder and explain in 2 minutes that maybe you want to rethink this in some way. So, I mean, it's just so I've just sort of stayed out of it. I just really don't know how to, or even if I should share my concerns and my viewpoint, because it is so very different than what they're doing. So maybe through GRC, this would be a way for David to see what it is, and then he will have the understanding about whether it fits or how it fits. They are always interested in how it fits with nature because that's not where they're coming from at all. And fortitude in particular happens to be a value for um, the protective mindset, which we're trying to get out of. And so I realize the seduction, especially in times of difficulty for fortitude, but it's a loop back into old stuff. And so it kind of makes me nervous when it comes up. Um, and they're all just disparate things. I mean, there's just, for me, no coherence. No, and that's been one of the problems with the value stuff. It's like all this, it's a shotgun full of pellets. And it's like, if they hit, fine. If they don't, fine. And it just has no coherence. So it's just awkward for me. Um, and I don't want to be preachy or directive, which I am both of. So I keep my mouth shut mostly because I just don't know how to
At,
interface in a
at
way
the
that would be helpful.
UN, we were not spending a whole lot of time debating, meanings and relevant example. I mean, well, no, we would do relevant examples, but our primary purpose was to reach, the ambassadors, if possible, and delegates, from the different nations, and talk to them, get them talking about values,
Yeah.
and
And yeah.
and getting it included, verbiage included within the propositions that were being voted upon.
And this is more in that vein for sure.
Yeah.
Would be much more comfortable in that vein. I don't know that they're at that level. I don't know that there's that kind of focus. Because We All is not a UN group, but they have a lot of UN people in their groups. So there is really a direct line often in their meetings to very high level folks, which was one of my attractions to that group. Um, I haven't seen that in the value space at all. So yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it'll just be interesting. And I have offered, however, under the rudicum of honesty, to talk about Smokescreen and how that book. So I don't know if you know Robert, but it's a book that was written by a guy named Chad Hansen, who's a forester. He spent all his life in the forest in various capacities. And the book is really, so far, an expose of the lies that the Forest Service, let's not say lies, the manipulations of language that the Forest Service uses to validate logging as excuse for everything and answer to all the forest problems, which it is not. So I think under the guise of honesty, it's interesting to explore the corruption of language, which this really, really showcases so very clearly, and which is one of the whole issues of Magna, because Magna is all about corrupting language. I mean, you can listen to people, and Ani did this. She was listening to Vance talk and going, yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. I want family values. I want this. I want that. I want this warm, loving, and he speaks that, but that's not what he's talking. And if you don't get that discrepancy, it's really easy to say, sure. And it gives justification.
It's actually hard to imagine. I don't know anybody I know
Yeah.
that would take that from Vance because there's there's
Well, there's other signals, but you have to pay attention to those, that's our selective listening. If you really like those words and you really want that, it's a justification for being in that group and being okay with what they do because of this. That's the way the mechanism works.
Maybe part of that is that you have to be able to you're not you don't know enough about what he's been doing. So maybe my listening comes from
Exactly,
this
exactly,
context of what
exactly. Yep, 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 yep.
that's maybe what's part of what's missing is the larger context.
The incongruity between actions and words and that kind of stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's for Trump, absolutely true. He talks about all these things and then he lies so it's like, how can you possibly? But it's like if you're hungry and you really want that and you hear that, it gives you an excuse for going along and feeling good about going along. Um, yeah. Yeah. So we'll see. We're going to discuss it again next month, which means I have to be there.
Well, one of the main things, the main values is not to judge,
Ah,
you know, and in terms of do not, to not be judgmental.
right.
And see, that's where the whole MAGA juggernaut, falls flat because
Right.
anything that opposes them
Is judged. Yeah.
is, well, it is not only judged or criticized fairly, but it just becomes communist, commie, or
Right.
socialist, or
Yeah.
traitor. Actually, traitor's the big one now.
Yeah.
That's all they say. That's all they'll say. There's no consideration of anything else. So there's no compromise at all.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and values, as we saw it at the UN among NGOs, values is all compromise because it extends out, or the awareness of values, and the attempt to justify the different ways of looking at values was totally compromised. There was no other no other word you could use. So
Say more about that.
that was the main thing we went for. Well, I don't remember details, but there are some social habits in various countries that are absolutely different. And they extend from, what is it, what's the word for it? The cutting of young girls,
Oh, female circumcision.
circumcision in certain African countries. And that is seriously on the bad side, of judgment, because it hurts the person and affects them for their life. But other national customs, even to the point of feminism, reaching a certain modicum of balance, with basic male, operating patterns that would be totally unacceptable in this country, but there is another balance, and you try to understand some of those things. In Afghanistan, it got out of line, but in other Arab countries, it isn't out of line. The women seem to have great power within their place, and their place in society, and how they're judged. It's just, and then you can say, well, it's simply different, but how do we accommodate that as a human race so that we're not condemning one another? And we would talk about some of the outliers with, let's say, the women's caucus, who would be pushing for, a certain hard line. I mean, it was particularly in those areas that this would come up. Um, and we saw that as a major part of the work is working with other NGOs who were activists in a certain one way or another, just to realize that what we hear you speaking from right now is the American social standard, which does that even belong in another part of the world? And some of our, let's say, Muslim members of the Values Caucus could very easily, offer counterpoint.
Were there ever conversations, and I'm just curious because I've never been involved, but I have been curious about this. So let's just talk about circumcision, for instance, because it's a clear thing. And it's usually something, there's a split in the culture, as I understand it, between a male approach and a female approach. And the females tend to accept it because they're being good people. That's just what our customs are. And so therefore we do
Right.
that. But men are really insistent that it needs to happen for some kind of reason. And I don't know what the reasoning is behind it. I don't know what the story is they tell themselves about that. But I would be curious to know if the story they tell is a fit for the values that they also would espouse for their society, whether there's a congruence or a discrepancy between those. Do you have any insight into that?
Can I ask a quick question before?
Yeah.
In the Muslim culture, maybe I should know this, but because the circumcision is a large part of what differentiates Christians and Jews. But are Muslim men circumcised?
Yeah, I don't know offhand.
I'm going to Google that. Go ahead, Robert.
And then,
Yeah, that's a good question, whether it's a female
my
issue
sense
or
is that many aren't circumcised.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's from the Values Caucus position, we saw the need for this kind of conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
I was invited over to Korea to meet Reverend Moon,
Oh,
and was invited to attend a mass wedding. 500 couples, were married at once in this big stadium. I mean, it was really strange. I mean, it was cold, and all these young girls, well, young women, they were probably 20s, were, in, let's just say, gowns fit for June weddings. They're freezing. So you can see, a whole range of them were seated below us. That was a spectacle to me. But there is evidently some, the jumping off point within the Korean society to accept that sort of thing.
yeah.
Or suggest it, I'm sure it's not done every day, but that was quite an extraordinary spectacle to watch. I even got to shake hands with the old man.
Yeah, the whole idea of arranged marriage, I think permeates a lot of the Asian cultures. So that's just sort of an extension of it. And to have that blessed by a sacred person would, certainly elevate that whole ritual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just another, I mean, there are all kinds of these different sort of anomalies that, but then again, I mean, mass, on a much smaller scale in this country, there are group weddings performed in this country by various groupings, particularly the Mormons.
Yeah, I really kind of wonder, because one of the issues I see with cultures like the Taliban and I think to some extent Saudi Arabia, um, is this desire to be modern and this desire to be traditional at the same time, and the tension between what you have to do to be modern and what you have to do to be traditional, and how those two conflict, in particular, the role of women. So when you are facing a lot of crisis, it's usually really good that the more eyes you have on the problem, the better off you're going to be. But when you eliminate half of your population as having anything to say about, you're really cutting off your own resources and making it much more difficult for you to resolve issues. And so this tension of not listening to women that the Taliban are so good at, and that I see in the Saudi Arabia current regime also, um, is a little different than the hidden power of women behind the veil, where they really do have a lot of influence and authority on the guys that they're married to,
Mhm.
and talking with, uh, and that there's and it's sort of a subtle acknowledgement of that instead of a disregard, a really strong disregard and disparagement of that. And it just makes it much harder. And I think those cultures have seen it become harder to actually be respected and present in the current global society without some sort of modernizing movement, and how difficult that is when you also carry that kind of baggage and are trying to stay traditional in that way.
Mhm. Yeah, well, what I'm in those terms, what I'm seeing happening right now through the MAGA movement is to actually reinstate those sorts of trends in our society.
Exactly.
Women
Take,
stay in the house.
yep. And have no real value other than reproduction.
I mean, you know, what's said in some cases is Trump is you know, seems enamored with President McKinley's term, you know, when it was all of the, you know,
Robber baron.
the robber barons, the
Is he
American elite.
is there something more to Trump's factuation with McKinley other than tariffs?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, that was the period, the 1890s, when truly the corporations ran the country during that time and had every, you know, every semblance of being ready, poised to take over, you know, the country, you know, for a considerable length of time. I think World War I is one of the reasons why that didn't hold, but you know,
Oh, Teddy Roosevelt.
and Teddy Roosevelt, certain people, but what I was going to say is that the upshot of the MAGA influence, I think, goes way back beyond that. I mean, it goes back to Puritan times, or you know, because that's a social, you know, an urge to have social change, to go back to what they consider to be the right way to, you know, for men and women to relate together, to, you know, communities to relate to one another. Um, it was simpler times, and that seems to be very heartening to many people right now. And
Yeah.
yet, so many of us recoil from that because, however, I mean, having grown up in the Puritan, with Puritan vibes all around, you know, in New England, you know, we were constantly being reminded that this was not the way to live. So we went to California to be hippies. So yeah, there you go.
Wow.
Yeah, that's for me where the birds of a feather stuff comes in, because you can see and appreciate how people with less life experience want simpler solutions. they just don't have the bandwidth to deal with the more complexity. And so it's confusing and anxiety producing. So they want things simple.
Yeah.
And that's, evolutionarily, you can kind of say that's where we've come from. And as we begin to understand, which I think we are really doing amazing things around the complexity of the planet, being able to manage and mesh those things together in a coherence that doesn't make us crazy, is a factor of time and experience. That's part of where that ability to do that kind of understanding comes from.
Well, it is important what the new Pope had to say about
yes.
some of Vance's ideas, that it's
Yes.
that your attention to, how you treat others, your caring for others is like ripples extending from throwing a rock in the pool.
Yeah.
And those closest to you, yourself, your family, the neighbors that you like and that sort of thing, get the most attention and are basically worth that, that level of attention. And as it goes out, of course, the ripples get less, well formed and so forth. And the Pope came right out and said, Musk is wrong. That under the teachings of Jesus Christ, it's absolutely made clear that it's everyone, and it's, your love goes out regardless of their situation in society, regardless of how much money they have, even regardless of need. There's a big surround for everybody. And that was important that he said that.
Well, and it's important that he's young.
I don't know how many were listening, but he said that.
I was surprised and incredibly pleased. I think Pope Francis was very, very astute in the way he spent his 12 years developing the Cardinal College, because he was responsible for 80 of the people of the 139 who were there had been under his tutelage. So,
but I mean, what this shows, I mean, we're talking about governance again, and what it shows is how theories of governance are really, single-minded.
they're values laden, aren't they?
They are so totally value laden, and they differ according to how you were brought up to think.
And I would say the system of values that you choose.
And I mean, Vance has done considerable flips, in his career as a human being.
Yep.
Trump maybe not. He seems to be he seems to be true to his teenage or even childhood form, but Vance has made, I mean, I actually enjoyed that book that he wrote,
the book,
Really Elegy.
Oh, the Vance book.
Yeah. At the time, I mean, I enjoyed it. I was passing it around.
So you really know that if you've read that, you really know the flip.
Yeah. There's an amazing flip there, and
I think that gives him the skill for misusing the language. That's exactly the point, because he really gets where that is coming from, and he can use those words to different effect. That's his value in the food chain right now.
Checking. Some male circumcision is common, like
among Muslims,
like 90%.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's like the Jews.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of half and half, I think, among white Europeans.
White European Jews?
No, just white Europeans.
Oh.
It's not common though among Africans, is it?
No.
but females use. It's just kind of interesting. You kind of wonder about those things.
A thought, an insight from in this back to, I mean, this is about fire, but this is also about languaging. And I don't think, Catherine, we've talked about this, but it's sort of an idea that's bubbling up in my mind. The like the first part of it is distinguish between wildfire, which and another time talk about. I guess you attended the first class yesterday, the morning class yesterday.
Oh, yesterday was full of doctor's appointments and other stuff, so I didn't attend anything.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so between just my general trying to understand how to make houses that don't burn, and these being exposed to wildfire experts. Anyway, so the thinking is that we need to start to understand that wildfires are different than the fires that burn all of our houses, which seems really clear. But the thing I was trying to think about is that, and this comes from Hart Hagen, that the idea that the timber industry manipulates public thinking through media. So the question to put out there is, I think that part of what the idea that wildfire in public conversation or thinking is that it's all wildfire, and not urban fires and real wildfires. But so there's the idea that so media is getting people really worked up and frightened about wildfire because of our houses are burning, which allows the Forest Service or the timber industry to continue to do their to promote the idea of things they need to do to reduce the threat of wildfire.
Right. So if you cut down trees, they don't burn.
And we have to
yeah.
cut down trees, and we have to do all those things so your house doesn't burn, which those two things are totally completely
So
disconnected.
one of the things I think Chad said around this, who's the guy who wrote Smokescreen, according to Hart, was that 20% of houses burn in forests and 80% in grassland. So when we're talking about wildfire or forest fire, we're really not talking about forests. We're really talking about grassland fires.
Especially Southern California.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mostly grassland.
That's
So landscape fire was another term that's come up to distinguish those two, that it has to do with the landscaping. Which it really, I mean, it's just, yeah.
well, it's even so landscape, is that the landscape within these these urban neighborhoods that burn, or is it?
Yeah, the Marshall Fire in Boulder is a perfect example. It was from a shed, and it decimated a bunch of houses, and there was very few trees. The trees actually kind of went through it. It's the houses that burned.
Yeah. Well,
Because
that's kind of where I come in.
And it's grass and stuff. I mean, there wasn't a lot of trees to burn there.
Yeah.
It's a urban environment, basically. Subdivision.
So within that idea, that it's the grasses and brush that starts the houses, but that to me,
But the building materials are what allow that to happen so easily. I mean, so there's this whole thing, because when they talk about house hardening, they're not talking about building materials. They're trying to take this very badly built structure and make sure stuff doesn't get in to burn it, which is kind of better than nothing. But it still begs the question, if we build with different things, it won't be so.
Well, which is also circles back to the timber industry.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we are just doing the building, the design world is just doing not just architects, but the planning, everything, the fire-wise people, we're just doing, I don't know how to say it, backflips. We're just tying ourselves in knots so that to ignore the real culprit, which is the thing you're building with, is the problem.
Yeah.
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 Well, but by the way, Carl, I enjoyed looking over your slideshow on the steel materials. I've never been good at doing, the estimating of costs. So what you've, proffered as a, as a little puzzle for me, is sort of it's out of my bandwidth.
Did I send you the one about the
You
comparing
said-
steel,
Yeah, steel to wood.
like the steel frames, and so
Yeah.
that was okay. That's the most recent one.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks.
It's just so funny. We've got, and this also relates, to this whole MAGA thing. They want to return to the past. Well, the past in California, and it's not so distant. There were a lot of houses in the grassland. I lived in one that was roofed with cedar
Shakes.
shake. And that would have just exploded in flame if we'd faced a bigger fire. The flames came down the side of the hill, and they were 100 feet high and just roaring. And suddenly the wind shifted and blew it back up the hill. I was sitting there with my friends, and we were trying to keep the roof wet. It wouldn't have lasted very long if the fire had just come another 100 feet closer. It was, and there was just no reason to worry about it that much, and this house was built in the 50s and 60s. And we can't do that anymore. That seems obvious.
Well, from the fellow who spoke yesterday, I'm so bad with the names, yesterday evening in this class, I think one of his points is it's the wind. It's the wind from.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the big difference between today and the 50s.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the climate and the drying out. See, this is the thing, because right after I did this class, Robert, on how to actually manage forest and how to make the forest wet, which was wonderful. The next thing I attended was by the Forest Service from Colorado Springs, Colorado. And they are so proud that they do clump and something is how they call it. So they had these beautiful pictures of this lovely lush forest, and they go in and they cut it so there's just clumps of trees and you can see the bare ground around it.
Oh, that kills the forest.
So what that does is it dries it all out so that it's going to all burn faster, but there's not so much to burn.
Yeah.
And they've benefited by logging, and they feel, I mean, it just makes you crazy. Just makes you crazy to see that. I mean, that picture for me was like worth 1,000 words, because you could just see the dryness.
Yeah.
In that
What
one
particular picture was this?
the wet. Let's see if I can find it.
There was another picture in one of these slides from these fire people that I find the replanting forests with large avenues, seemingly to be fire breaks.
Right. Okay.
But they're
there
just
you go.
they're wind avenues to accelerate.
Well, yeah. Plus the fact animals instinctively will not cross those avenues because they can be picked off by a hawk or any other sharp-eyed predator. That's the reason why roads, even just a logging road, which is relatively narrow, why they completely cut up, habitat for animals. And this has been studied, extensively, and doesn't seem to be too much we can do about it, but the roads.
There's before and after.
Oh, so that's part of the clumping, huh?
Yeah. So they went from this to this.
What's
Oh
the
my
ground
God, where is?
cover? Is that sand? The ground?
Well, no, that's forest floor. It used to be forest floor. They
Where
did
where
267 acres.
where
And
is
they
this
did-
from? Oh my God, this is
isn't it wonderful? Yeah.
where
This
is this from a day Hart Hagen, or is this from
no. I said I attended a different seminar after Hart, and this is that
Oh,
seminar.
that's the one
from
you
the Forest Service from Colorado Springs.
oh
Yes.
my. You should send that is
Isn't that wonderful? Yeah.
you you typically kind of exaggerate things. No.
Oh,
This is extremely dramatic.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, really demonstrated.
Yeah.
It's I mean,
Yep.
and then when I see that, I would use that photograph to say to evidence that the dirt below our forest are really no different. There's no ecological difference between that and desert.
Yeah.
That this picture really, oh my God.
Well,
It's
that's what it will become because it's going to get dried out.
well,
Yeah.
but I mean, I
Yeah.
just thinking the way it functions now.
Well, the one on the left is the way it would have functioned.
Oh no, I know the one on the
Yeah.
right, the one on the
Yeah.
right, because that soil is dead. There's trees growing in it, sort of
Yeah.
scrappy trees.
It's the same forest.
Oh, I know it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
this is the before and after the same
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
Because these guys shared these photographs
With
and said,
great pride.
yeah, is this
Yeah.
a power? Do you have these slides, or is this from?
I have some of them. I didn't take all of them, but I did take some of them.
So this is a screenshot from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
What
God.
does co-swap mean?
I'm sorry.
What does co-swap mean?
So that's a title for a kind of funding that they get to do this kind of work.
Hmm.
So this is
It probably has conservation in it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is.
Yeah.
Oh, Catherine, please send me this link, and also if you can, if there's the link to the conference or whatever it was, maybe the.
Yeah, I'm sure they have it up.
Oh, that photograph. Oh my God, it's.
Yeah, here's another one.
Oh my God, it's.
Another before and after, 69 acres.
Oh, it didn't change.
It didn't change. Okay, so let me stop sharing and share again.
That is such a dramatic picture. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah. See this one? Austin Bluffs.
Yeah, it's a
It's the same place. Before and after.
I see. The before one has snow on the ground.
Yeah, it does.
So it's different. And
yeah, that's that kind of.
and there was snow on the right-hand picture in the former one. That would explain the white ground floor.
Yeah.
But this also this doesn't this is well this is actually what's the image is a little shifted. The other one that I think the viewpoint was exactly the same.
Yeah, I don't see the shift because the houses are here, the houses are here.
Yeah.
The top line, the road is there, and second.
Well, it's just that when you're trying to communicate to people who don't want to see it,
yeah,
it's easier when there's no shift.
but yeah. The snow makes it a little more difficult, but the spaces here are also bigger.
Yeah, you can see that all of the ground.
Yeah, it's just
the brush has all been cleared.
Everything has been cleared. There's no ladder fuel. There's none of that. It's all gone.
There's no secondary, I don't know, if other stuff that helps create healthy soil.
So thinking of language again, so we've got ladder fuels, which talk about the need to remove all this refuse on the forest floor to burn, and flows, which means that the nutrient flows that the plants leave on the ground to be composed by other living things is also removed. So we're starving the forest at the same time as we're making it arid.
Yeah.
It's just, and
Well, you say flows, the nutrient flows.
right. So when you talk about nutrient flows, then, and Hart is really good at this, then you see that the dead logs and the decomposition that's happening there are important because they're feeding all the life that's living in the forest. When you take it out, then all that life starves because it doesn't have the things that it used to have to eat, but it doesn't burn. I see. And so there, that languaging thing is really, really key. So both of those things that I showed are examples of thinning from the Forest Service perspective. So they talk a lot about thinning because if you thin a forest, then it doesn't burn. Well, environmentalists do that too, but they do it very differently. You can't create those kinds of pictures because they don't create that kind of space when they thin the forest. They don't take big trees, they take little trees. They're much more selective. It doesn't break the flow. It does open the canopy in some places, but it doesn't bear the soil. There's a big difference. And those differences, I mean, are not apparent in the word thinning. So they
The
both same word and mean very different things.
what's also the from yesterday, the term for the burnt out trees that they also cut? What's the
Snags.
That's what I thought, snags.
Yeah.
He
So
pointed out that the snags, there's 59 different species, or 59% of the species, bird species,
yeah.
depend on snags for homes
And not just birds, just
oh yeah,
also
actually, just as I said
bugs
that, it
and
was not just
insects and
birds.
everything else. Yeah. It's one of the most diverse habitats in the forest is snags. And snags are one of the things they go in and take out because after all, they're burned, right? So
Yeah, I used to hike in
just
the Cascades,
appalling.
uh, in middle of Oregon. And there were wilderness areas, So I have this great picture of I had a borzoi that was given to me, and a big dog, but pure white.
Oh,
I had pictures of him trying to get through the tangle. And these weren't little snags like that. These were 4 to 5 foot diameter logs
right.
everywhere. And it was an eye opener for me to see what a real forest looked like.
Right.
It
Right.
was absolutely moist.
Yes.
Ferns
Yes. So
and
they're
other
very slow burning. Yeah.
very wet loving
Yep.
plants
Yep.
all over the place on the
Yep.
forest floor, dark. And then these huge, monumental Douglas fir primarily at that point. Down the road, it's all ponderosa pine. same sort of look, but the trees change because just up, just over the pass, the situation changed completely. But that was stunning to me, just to see it was horrible to get through.
Yeah.
My dog told me so. Oh. But that forest was absolutely full of life.
Yes. Yeah.
Everything was, there were berries, there were,
Yeah.
habitat of every type. And yeah, you don't see that anywhere where there has been logging, where there has been
Right.
clearing.
Exactly. That's the point. That's exactly the point. Because what grows back isn't the
You
same
never
stuff
see
at all.
that kind of forest anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's totally obvious what the loss is. I mean, there's just such a verdancy, is that the word, of life, just, everywhere.
Yeah.
The vibrancy of life,
Yeah. Verdant.
which just does not occur in the log
Exactly.
over areas near where I was living in Vermont.
Yeah.
Forests, trees were reasonably large, but the ground had just been completely cleared. There was very little understory.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
Then it was owned, this whole mountaintop was owned by a logging company. And they went through every 50, 60 years and
This was in Vermont, you said?
in Vermont, but it wasn't clear cut. So even that made a huge difference, but still the forest was different.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I
exactly.
knew was possible.
Yeah. I'm struggling how to talk to my city folks. We had a meeting yesterday, and I've got the ear of two people who have agreed. One is going to meet with me, and the other one wants me to write stuff up, which I am having a great deal of difficulties doing. I just can't write fast enough with my fingers. So I got to figure out another way to do that. But how to really make this case in a very short time with a lot of power. And I'm really starting to think that talking about cool and wet, that's where life is. It's only in cool and wet. When it gets hot and dry, life disappears. I mean, it's everybody's experience. It's not something that you can really argue. And so thinking about that, how can we make our climate cool and wet? What do we do in our city? What do we do in our forests that ensures cool and wet?
Yeah, no, that's a perfect.
And
Sure.
just drive that, because then I can show those pictures and say, where do you think cool and wet is? In the thinned area or in the forested area. I mean, I'm trying to get out of having to convince people, but to allow them to convince themselves pretty quickly about that. Yeah. Yeah, it's just so appalling. Mm. Do either of you know of a good talk to text program?
No, but I was thinking of that when you said.
Yeah, I've been trying to find, somebody recommended something called Sybil, and I've not been able to find it. There's more than Sybil in the name, obviously, because Sybil brings up a design school and mythology and all sorts of other things, but not
Yeah.
a dictation program. And somebody else has also recommended using ChatGPT, which is sort of, again, goes against my grain. I don't really want to do that. We're trying to use less energy, not more energy, but I might play with that just, yeah, because it's a cleanup is just as hard for me to do as the original typing. And it takes more finesse because it's like letters and words and punctuation. So it's finer tuning, and then that's really hard for my hands to do right now.
I appreciate the drive you have, though, to do it and find the solution.
Well, there's so much to say now.
I know.
It just
And
is.
not much time to say it in.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, that certainly has come home to me
Certainly
also.
get the feeling that it's all coming to a head.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, time to try and get out in front of it as much as we can.
This is such maybe a personal, I mean, question to you, Robert. When you moved to the west, were you awestruck by the size of trees compared to what you grew up with?
In part, but I mean, just uphill from the neighbor's house, up the the ridge, there was an oak tree that I think we measured at 17 feet in circumference.
Is this in Oregon or?
No, this was in Vermont,
Hmm.
southern Vermont. It's an oak tree.
Oh
And
my God.
that was, so we're used to big old trees. They hadn't all been cut out. Seed trees were always left. But yeah, just the height. There's nothing.
Oh, so the height of it.
There's nothing like that, like
Yeah.
out in.
The ponderosa.
Oh, I spent the night underneath a redwood, a coastal redwood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when the light came on, I mean, I got there after dark and just put my head up against, the trunk. And when I looked up in the morning, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, boy, that would have been
You
yeah,
know, there's at least 200 feet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
but
like
also
a cathedral.
the light coming through those redwood trees, the coastal trees.
Yeah.
There's some
Yeah.
spiritual or
Yeah. Yeah.
It's-
Yeah. It's very sacred space. Yeah.
So yes, I was very, very moved by it, but not so much from the age, aspect of a tree just being old and really, significant. Because we had those, although so many. I mean, did you know that there are etchings? Didn't have photography in say the 1840s or 30s, but most of Western Massachusetts was deforested. And it's not now. I mean, there's continuous forest, but it was almost completely deforested. In part because that's what they made roads from. That was probably the biggest draw. This
oh yeah.
chunk
Given
of
the history of our people, our humans, yeah, it's easy to believe.
yeah, and yeah, I was surprised by that.
Well, a
Yeah.
note from my history professor in college, who pointed out that Rome or Italy was deforested by the Romans. All these, the rolling grasslands of Tuscany, the rolling hills of Tuscany that are so beautiful. That was all forests. And she pointed that out because the, the other part of that, her point was that in the 70s, in parallel to the energy crisis, there were lots of PhD theses about Rome's energy crisis because they had cut down all their trees.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting that they didn't seem to learn about copying, both the Japanese and the Scots, and early Britons understood how to harvest lumber from a tree without killing it. And that you could, if you did that right, you could harvest forever, basically, and the tree would keep growing. But you didn't have to cut it down to harvest. There's a certain way of cropping it that would do that. And the Romans didn't seem to have that technique at all.
Yeah, they were very sensitive.
I'm just laughing here. I'm just imagining all these really, what should I say, disappointed trees. These trees are just feeling, totally, they try to grow, they keep trying to grow, and it constantly gets cut down and frustrated.
Yeah. But they're
Is
not cut down. They're not cut down. And they do grow differently because
oh, you're talking about the cropping when you would say they
Yeah.
don't cut down the cropping.
yeah,
The
they don't
cropping.
cut they don't cut trees down. They don't kill them at all. They
Yeah,
just
they would tend to go horizontally, I would imagine.
yeah, and they grow straight up, so they have things that are straight up that they can cut.
Well, that's particularly the Japanese cypress trees that grows that way.
Well, they're trained to grow that way.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a natural thing. It's an interaction with humans so that humans can use the wood and not kill the tree. But Romans just didn't think that way, and we sort of inherited a lot of you just take it
Yeah.
instead of keeping it alive to use it. Yeah.
I'm gonna share a picture that I've shared with a couple of times. I don't. This is a picture of a tree from it's the bristlecone pine forest, which to plug California. This is the oldest tree in the world.
Yes.
They grow to some of the oldest are 4,500 years old, but it's very dense wood, and so when they do fall, they take a long time to decompose. This tree fell in
Oh
1600.
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, It,
Yeah. I'm wondering how they even knew it was a tree when I saw it. It's like, it wouldn't be my first.
well, when you're there, this is a
Yeah.
picture I took.
Oh, you took that.
I
Ah,
took this.
ah,
And when you see it in the context of all the other trees, I mean, they are and I can share more pictures. They are kind of scraggly and twisty, and the grain is. I mean, they grow very slow. It's very dense wood. Um, and it's not a very large area. I mean, so it's not a it's not so numerous as the redwood trees. And probably they were saved because it's such an isolated place on a very high ridge, and probably if they ever tried to cut them down, it was so hard to cut them down
yeah.
because it's such a hardwood. I'm just sharing this in the spirit of the trees are extraordinary trees in the West and old trees, and
It's lovely.
Yeah, I've hiked in areas of the Sierra where, I've seen trees like, I mean, living trees that are all gnarly, and half of it is gray wood. It's so old, and it hasn't been growing up there, on the tips, on the branches. And yet this one I'm thinking of, I sat and drew it. I still have the drawing somewhere. It was like it had a tutu on. It was growing, bristles, and had cones and around the midriff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I have no idea how old that one was, but it looked very old to me. No. It's 2:30. I think I'm going to leave.
Yep. Time to do.
I wanted to do, and
Well, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
I appreciate it. I'll see you next week.
Okay. All right.
bye, guys.
Bye bye.